A review, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Welcome, everybody.
Go ahead.
We have a lot of people with us already. Hi, Olivia. Welcome.
Good morning, Soma. This is Shamso with Living Well Kent.
Welcome, Shamso. It's so great to hear your voice.
Nice to see you and hear your voice as well.
Oh, it's fantastic. Welcome, Ali. As people enter in, could you put in just a word about what the sky looks like outside your window? Right? It's bright and sunny today. But sometimes those of us who are in Zoom rooms too often forget to look at the sky. And it's good to do that, to breathe. And please say where you are. As people are coming in, they're writing in where they're from and what the sky looks like outside. Welcome, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be with all of you today. I'm Shoma Shaha from Wellbeing and Equity in the World. I'm joined today by my colleague Jennifer Pitts, also a senior fellow at We in the World, and partners across Win with Business. And can you all, if you're a partner in Win with Business, can you all wave? We encourage you to have your window open to say who you are. We'll get started. Over to you, Jennifer.
All right, let me close my window. I kind of opened everything right in front of everything else. Welcome, everybody. We're so glad that you could be here and join us. We're excited about this, our first in a series of monthly webinars that support and grow the work that we've been doing with Win with Business over the past more than a year now. And many of you have been involved in in creating that work, and hopefully others will join as we move forward with it into the future. This first webinar is in honor of Black History Month, and it also highlights one of our briefs that we developed as part of the early work of and the ongoing work of Win with Business. So the racial justice brief will be highlighted here, and so the topic that we'll be delving into and having a meaningful and deep conversation, I hope today, about what we can do to really move practices of business forward in terms of supporting racial justice. Go ahead and switch to the next slide. So today, after welcome and introductions, I think that's what we just did. We have a poem we're going to move into next, but we'll also then be digging in a little bit to the WIN frameworks and the WIN with Business Brief. And those we have been developing together, and the one supported the other. The WIN frameworks are very much grounding for the WIN with Business framework as well. And so we'll be talking about that briefly. We'll dig into the overview of the CEO blueprint. We have developers of that blueprint here with us today to speak in more depth about what that looks like and what it is, and how they use it, how we can use it going forward and lift that up. And then we have a couple of bright spots. We have Andy Shalal from Busboys and Poets, and we have Olivia Benson from the Forbes Fund to talk about their work as well. And then we'll break out and dig in smaller conversations about what we heard and what we see as possibilities and for using this work in the future. Go ahead and move forward to the next slide. Keelan, can you go ahead and move to the next slide? I think this is our poem. Yes. So Andy from Busboys and Poets suggested this Langston Hughes poem, and I can't think of a better way to really kick off this topic. So we are hoping that, I think Karen, you said you would read the first section of this poem, and then Shoma, I don't remember who said the second.
Actually, I was wondering, Marta offered to as a backup, but Shamsa, are you still on?
Yes, I'm here.
Shamsa, would you consider reading it after Karen?
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And then as you listen to this, please put in this is just a moment to center ourselves and breathe and come into this space. All of us are running, and this is a moment to really ground ourselves as we think about racial justice and the role of business in creating that. So just invite you to think about, as a phrase strikes you, to put that into the chat, just almost as it flows through you.
Yep. So Karen, I think you'll kick it off, and then so yes, I saw a note from Karen. Me? Yes, you.
And do you want me to read the whole poem or just the first column? You do it a couple of times, right, Shoma?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead? It's not that long. Why don't you go ahead and read the whole thing?
I Dream a World by Langston Hughes. I dream a world where man no other man will scorn, where love will bless the earth and peace its paths adorn. I dream a world where all will know sweet freedom's way, where greed no longer saps the soul nor avarice blights our day. A world I dream where black or white, whatever race you be, will share the bounties of the earth and every man is free, where wretchedness will hang its head and joy, like a pearl, attends the needs of all mankind. Of such I dream, my world.
It's beautiful. Okay.
Shamsa.
Yes. Should I read it the same phrases?
Yes.
Yes.
I dream of a world where man no other man will scorn, where love will bless the earth and peace its path adorn. I dream the world where all will know sweet freedom's way, where greed no longer saps the soul, nor avarice blights our day. A world I dream where black or white, whatever race you be, will share the bounties of the earth, and every man is free, where wretchedness will hang its head, and joy, like a pearl, attends the needs of all mankind. Of such I dream my world.
And just invite you to breathe and let the words sort of come into your soul. I want to welcome Andy Shalal into this space and to share and for each of you to put in the chat just phrases that just spoke to your heart in this poem. And Andy, I invite you to share it in voice as you would.
Yeah, what would you like me to do? Would you like me to, are we all reading it?
Oh, I think it's been read a couple of times.
Okay.
And we're just inviting if there's a phrase or piece of this that really speaks to you to invite.
Yeah,
you.
I think this is kind of the world I think most of us dream of. It's a world that Langston Hughes dreamt of. And the interesting thing I think about Langston Hughes is that he saw so much hope at a time when really you would think that he would be the opposite of that, right? He was a Black man living in this country under Jim Crow in the 1920s and 30s. How good could it have been? You know, and for him to see a possibility of a different world was really quite remarkable. And he writes a lot of his poems really kind of speak to that possibility of what could be as opposed to what is. And I think this is what it's about.
I know it, poetry, the beauty of it is it strikes each of us in our own way. And I see so much in the chat of people calling in the same phrases where greed no longer saps our soul, where the joy like a pearl attends the needs, and people talking about hope. And I just invite us to consider that this journey to racial justice and equity is about joy. It's a journey of celebration and of unleashing who we can be to one another. And that if we can hold that as the destination, then it might help us in the hard work we need to do in the meantime to get there, because even all through it is a process of liberation for each and every one of us. A process of joy. Thank you so much for bringing this poem in particular to us today, Andy.
Absolutely.
Back to you, Jennifer. Please feel free to keep the chats coming.
Yeah, I felt my heart open and soften as you read that. And so hopefully we'll go into the rest of this with that spirit. But so I think we did a bit of the welcome and introductions, but go ahead on to the next slide. And maybe Shoma, you can talk a little bit about the well-being in the nation, and I'll jump in at the point of Win with Business. Does that make sense?
Sure. So for those of you who are new to Wellbeing in the Nation, I welcome you here today. I'm Shoma Shaha. I serve as Executive Lead for Wellbeing in the Nation, which is a strategic network that's truly multi-local and goes from grassroots to grass tops, connects communities first and foremost and community residents with major national organizations all the way to businesses and federal agencies who have all committed to creating a path for intergenerational well-being and equity together on a foundation of racial justice. That's what we work on, small tasks, but we've divided that up into some significant areas of work around example, building an equitable economy and really thinking about the role of business in creating that equitable economy, even as we also need to shift public policies around that equitable economy. And what it looks like for us to change the way we measure and what we hold ourselves accountable to and who we hold ourselves accountable to across generations and communities, and what it looks like to begin to shift narrative and culture, even as we shift policies and systems and financing systems. This is creating democracy, creating a free society is a collective task, and we invite you to join us, and thank you for joining us today in that. Jennifer, next slide.
Next slide.
So the Win with Business Collaborative formed to, really when partners in the WIN network who each reach hundreds of businesses said, we need a different framework and we need to come together to co-create this framework and to think about how some of these things could apply and help businesses move forward. And so that's really why the Win with Business Collaborative is there as a collaborative effort to say, how can businesses advance the well-being of the people they reach? We go to the next slide, the well-being of the places on a foundation of equity and racial justice. These are some of the partners, and many of you have waved, and feel free to wave again if you are part of the partners who are creating the Win with Business Collaborative. Some of you may notice that this list has grown since we were at the Surgeon General's meeting, and that's because this is a growing network. We welcome people and know that different people have more to add, and it's really as we grow, as we each deepen into this journey together, that we'll get some more. Next slide. Jennifer?
So in many of our meetings together and presentations, we take the time to acknowledge the land on which we sit, the Indigenous people whose land this was, and in ancient times and now, and the land that we call our homes, they once called their homes as well. And so as we move into the next part of this, we're asking you to take some time to go to the link, the native land link, and find who were the native people on the land where you sit today, and bring that into the chat and share that with us, and take time to think about the legacy that they can bring to helping us think in new ways about moving forward with our work. Just take a moment to do that. Okay, and as we continue to put that in the text, let's move on to the WIN frameworks. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into those. Shoma's going to kick it off, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about the WIN with Business framework. Go ahead.
Next slide.
Take the next slide. Go ahead and move to the next slide. There we go.
It just takes a couple of minutes.
Yes.
So
Thank
as
you.
you've seen today, we begin by acknowledging the legacies that got us here, some of which have been of dignity and inclusion, and many of trauma and exclusion. Those of dignity and inclusion have assured that some people have all of the vital conditions they need, things like a sense of belonging and civic muscle, housing and transportation, and meaning access to meaningful work and wealth. And many others actually from birth don't have access to these things, and as a result often exist in conditions of adversity and urgent needs. And many of our systems have built around the assumption that we will have this in place, and therefore much of our response systems are about acute response to adversity, rather than assuring an economy that creates the conditions that everyone needs to thrive. We begin by acknowledging that, by setting a North Star that more people will be thriving, that we will thrive together, and fewer people will be struggling and suffering. That in order to do that, we know we need to change our culture and practices to address our underlying systems of racism, colonialism, and other inequities that got us here, and to shift the conditions of our economy and our culture and our policies and systems so that more and more people can be thriving. Next slide. We talk a lot about these vital conditions. These grew out of conversations with thousands of community residents who took the idea of social determinants and said, wait, these are not things that are just delivered as a service. They're conditions we create for each other in community. And so they put belonging and civic muscle at the heart of what people need to thrive, with equity as a core part of that. And then said that everyone needs, this isn't just what people who are poor need or people in adversity need. Everyone needs a thriving natural world, basic needs for health and safety, lifelong learning, meaningful work and wealth, humane housing, and reliable transportation. The Win with Business briefs that are being publicly released today are all about helping us to understand each of these domains, and the role of business in each of these. It's so easy to talk about these things theoretically. What we've heard from business leaders all around the country who work together to build, if you go to the next slide, the Win with Business briefs, is that we need to make it practical for businesses. Now, this isn't just the effort of a group of people. In fact, across the country, we've been looking at the intersection of health and the economy. The Surgeon General in January of 2020 released a report on the community health and economic prosperity and the role of business within that integrated the idea of what it means to improve the well-being of people and places and those affected by inequities, and to what it looks like to assure the vital conditions that everyone needs to assure more people are thriving and fewer people are struggling and suffering, using many of the Win with Business frameworks and Win frameworks as a core part. Now, this was written by authors all across the country and with businesses, people in community development and financing and investment together. And then the Win with, if you go to the next slide, the Win with Business briefs were created to really support this work. And Jennifer, I'll pass it off to you.
Okay. Yes, the the Win with Business briefs and the framework for those came out of extensive work we did early in the process to really purview the landscape of what was already out there in support of well-being in the business world. And so we looked at what do businesses do in terms of supporting the well-being of people, and then what go ahead and build. Let's just go ahead and build it out. There's a model that we came up with, a framework to represent the different aspects of support that businesses can bring to bear to really improve the well-being of people, places, and equity and racial justice policies that support across the board, as well as inside of each of these areas. And then in the center, there's one more. This is really the contribution that businesses can make. We not only looked at what businesses were already doing, but the need for additional work that businesses can do. And these briefs we're hoping will extend what businesses feel is possible and know is possible and take on as they learn and grow about contributing to a thriving and just world. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jennifer.
So we've written 10 briefs. Well, we wrote 9 briefs, and then the racial justice brief is what we're going to really focus on today, and that is work done by PolicyLink and others, and they had done such a beautiful job of bringing this work forward and the focus for very practical and important aspects of what business can do. So rather than write a brief about it ourselves, we're highlighting and lifting up that brief as one of the 10 areas that we've written about and are rolling out today. We also have briefs on belonging and civic muscle, thriving in natural world, all of the other vital conditions that Shoma walked through before. And also the basic needs vital condition was so rich that we broke it into 3 pieces. So there's a separate brief on health, food, and safety. And as we go through the rest of the year, you'll see webinars on each of these, but we're grounding all of that effort, all of those webinars in this racial justice lens and with a view toward how to undergird all of the actions in all of these areas with a lens towards racial justice. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So, thank you, Shoma. Shoma just put a link in the chat for where you can find the briefs. You can also, but let's go ahead and just dig in. I think we're almost on time. I want to make sure that we're moving along and giving everybody time to speak. But Shaibia Dalal and Catalina Caro are going to talk to us a bit about the development of the briefs, what's in there, and how we can take it forward and use it in our work.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Shoma, for having us here. It's wonderful to be with everyone today. My name is Shaibia Dalal, and I'm the Director of Strategic Growth and Operations at PolicyLink. For those of you who may not be familiar with PolicyLink, we are a national racial and economic equity institute, advancing equity through policy research, advocacy, and implementation at the local, state, and national level. And I'll quickly let my wonderful colleague introduce herself as well before we move on.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Shaibia. I'm Catalina Caro. I'm a Senior Manager of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Partnerships and Research at Just Capital. And a quick overview of Just Capital. Our mission is really to build an economy that works for all Americans by helping companies improve how they serve all of their stakeholders, so workers, communities, customers, the environment, and shareholders.
Thank you. Next slide. So before we dive deep into the blueprint, I just wanted to situate our work within our broader corporate racial equity portfolio. More than 20 years of policy expertise movement building has shown PolicyLink that we really need all of America's power players to step into the racial equity movement right now. And without corporate America on our side, we cannot remake the economic and social systems that we really need to enable people to achieve their full potential. And so PolicyLink, Just Capital, and FSG a few years ago launched a multi-year initiative to help corporations contribute to building an equitable and healthy nation for all. And this initiative really does build on the CEO blueprint that the 3 organizations created, and we'll dive deeper into in just a minute. Our theory of change, just to quickly go over that, focuses on 3 main areas. The first is fueling the movement. So really harnessing the momentum that we're seeing right now in corporate America around racial equity and lifting up the organizations and the assets that have already been working to advance racial equity for many years now and can really be applied to inform corporate practices and increase transparency. The second is really sort of establishing an accountability structure. So shedding clarity on what actions corporations really need to prioritize in order to embed equity across the entire organizations. And then we want to look at driving integration and adoption. So knowing that changing corporate practices will take time, it'll take mindset shifts, and it's not just about building awareness, it's also about business leaders understanding that there is a moral imperative and an economic and democratic imperative to doing this work. We expect that these 3 actions will change corporate behavior, evolve the narrative on the relevance of equity to business, and then also popularize accountability frameworks for these companies, ultimately bringing us the societal benefits that we really need to create an equitable and thriving nation for all. And so building off of the blueprint, also in partnership with FSG and Just Capital, we are also now working to design and build and test rigorous equity standards that will really serve as the foundation for accountability and reporting frameworks for corporations. So next slide.
Thanks, Shaibia. I think now we're going to dig into the CEO Blueprint for Racial Equity, which really aims to help companies understand and address both the intended and unintended consequences of all of their products, policies, and practices on people of color. And it really does this by outlining actions for businesses in 3 key domains. So inside of the company, within the communities, and where the companies are situated, and the broader societal level. And these domains are very similar to the ones, Wynn has been working on within the self, within the community, and broader. And so when we take a look at each domain and dig in a little bit further, we see that, when we say inside the company, we mean that companies should be taking actions related to reimagining their HR policies and the practices that they're that are actively anti-racist, including conducting pay equity audits, creating grievance mechanisms for employees, and expanding their worker power and voice. Additionally, we're asking companies to design products that center racially equitable outcomes. For example, that can be discontinuing products that harm communities of color, or it could be expanding product reach to communities of color as well. For the second domain, the actions companies can take within the community where they're situated include advocating for local policies that address structural inequities, so policies that improve public transportation or local housing, supporting and advancing justice and liberation policies for people of color in the company's hometowns, wherever they're situated, and really policies to advance community safety. In the third domain, we identify actions companies can take at the broader societal level. These include creating partnerships with organizations led by people of color. It could be adapting a racial equity lens to grant making, introducing people of color-led organizations to their funders and networks. Additionally, it includes communications that advance racial equity and really conducting an assessment of the communications that companies are putting forward to ensure that they're not reinforcing racial stereotypes and that they're not only elevating the voices of white employees and in their external communications. And so by meaningfully adopting these actions that we've outlined across the 3 domains, and these examples are just a very few number of examples within the racial equity blueprint, we really want companies to have significant influence on racial justice. And so far, we're seeing companies that are bolstering their diversity and inclusion programs, and that's good, but it's a limited action. The change we really need can't be limited to just having implicit bias trainings or hiring 1 or 2 Black people on their board or issuing public statements in support of Black Lives Matters. What we're really looking for is a systemic, enterprise-wide response, taking stock of a business's 360 degrees of influence and impact, and that's what's really required here. So the CEO Blueprint for Racial Equity provides just the beginnings of the roadmap for what it means to be an anti-racist, equitable corporation. And this is part of our ongoing work. As Shaibia said, we'll be creating rigorous metrics to follow this, and we'll be updating the CEO Blueprint and releasing an updated version in the coming months that will have additional examples of companies doing this work. And the piece around accountability is just really, really important. And that's why we're structuring accountability for corporations through developing the metrics and standards for companies. I think we can go to the next slide.
So we're doing this work precisely because organizations have such a long way to go in terms of advancing equity and really grasping both the moral and the business implications. So just up front, there is no organization that is currently doing this work perfectly or doing it in ways that reinforce across the 3 domains that Catalina just went over. But that said, we did want to quickly lift up just a few examples of some efforts that fit well within the spirit of the blueprint, the recommendations in there. And we want to acknowledge that some of these can be adapted to smaller organizations and others may require a larger platform or resources, but there are starting points for all organizations right now, regardless of sectors, and they do not have to require massive resources. I'll just go over one example from each column to be mindful of time. But looking at within the company, so Apple recently announced that it will tie executive bonuses to performance against 6 goals, including diversity and inclusion. If your company or organization offers bonuses as compensation, that's a great one to adapt. Within the community, Patagonia does a wonderful job of amplifying the voice and the reach of grassroots environmental justice organizations by partnering with them on media, events, grant making, and networking, really giving them the spotlight and giving them the power. So as Catalina pointed out, any organization, regardless of size or sector, can make efforts to partner with grassroots organizations that are led by and serving people of color. Within society, Cigna partnered with a local healthcare organization led by a person of color in Memphis to promote breast cancer screenings among Black customers who were living in underserved areas with very limited access to screening facilities. And this strategy grew Cigna's customer base and their physician network, while also implementing life-saving measures for marginalized communities. And then lastly, we have Target as an example. Target recently established they call it REACH, the Racial Equity Action and Change Committee, to basically create an enterprise-wide racial equity action plan. So this has not been implemented yet. There's an example of something that is trying to really hit across all of the domains by focusing on team, guests, community, civic engagement, and public policy. And while they're still figuring out what the exact elements of this strategy will look like, they do plan on focusing on this by really setting clear metrics and measurable goals, working with the community to listen, learn, and iterate, and then track and report progress. So I think that is the end of our presentation. So we'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And just as you're digesting this, I invite you to put into the chat, what are you hearing as examples or ideas? And please do this all throughout the webinar of strategies you might be able to try within your organization. That might be a good fit for you. Now, many of us, some of you I notice are from nonprofits, and others are, leading in corporations. But really, these are strategies that can apply to any organizational leader. And so I just wanted to make sure that we clarify that as well. Awesome. Ali is talking about Patagonia and Target, that sounds like something that they might be able to do. With that, I have the great honor of welcoming Andy Shalal. Andy, can you wave your hand, so everybody can see you? And Keelan, is there a way we can put a spotlight on Andy so to make him a little bit bigger so that as he comes to the fore? Andy, you started Busboys and Poets. Wave to Andy if you've eaten ever at Busboys and Poets in DC, any of the ones. So, one of the things that you've done that everybody, I think, feels so appreciative of is when they walk into Busboys and Poets, is that sense that this is a place that everyone could belong. Can you talk a little bit about how you've created that culture of inclusion? And Keelan, I think we could stop sharing the slides for the moment for this next 10 minutes.
Thank you so much, Samova, for inviting me to be part of this. I think part of it is that I wanted a place that I wanted to feel comfortable myself going to. And, many entrepreneurs sort of figure this out. They see something, they see a need, and then they start putting it together. So I wanted a place that made someone like me or someone that is not necessarily, a white American, fitting in this culture to be able to feel comfortable and not feel excluded in going to places when you go out to eat. Oftentimes, I think here, like, for example, like DC, I noticed is of course, like many other cities, very segregated. And, people mix together during the day because they go to work and, there are some mixing of people from different backgrounds, different races, different ethnicities. But at night, everybody goes their separate way. And I always believe that in order for you to really change a culture and change the way that we interact with one another as residents of this country, we have to be able to connect with each other culturally. And we don't do that really well. We don't have many opportunities for cultural connections. So I wanted to create a place where racial and cultural connections can actually be at the forefront. They could be uplifted, a place that artists and musicians and politicians can come together and kind of have a collision of ideas so that they come up with new and novel ways of solving the world problems. I wanted a place where people come and take a deliberate pause and be able to meet someone that they may never met, be sitting at a table that's a shared table where somebody else sits there, and you ask them to pass the sugar or something like that, and suddenly you start a conversation, you become great friends. And we see that happen over and over again. And by creating spaces like that, I think you can really begin to transform an area or community. And I think that's how transformation happens. So I wanted to create a place that felt like anybody that walks in, they could feel like they belong.
So Andy, that is such a compelling vision. How did you, as you thought about hiring and orienting staff, take it down to the level of you're sitting there, you're deciding who to hire, you're orienting your staff after they've been hired. How do you help them operationalize? Like, how do you make that meaningful to them? If you're somebody who's a host or hostess or a server, what does that mean? And what's the kind of story that you tell them that helps them really build that culture of inclusion?
I think if you have lived in America a day or for many generations, you are impacted by race in some level. And so I always thought that was kind of the foundational thing, that we have to talk about race to be able to not get it out of the way, but at least be able to come to an understanding of where we are and who we are to each other, because that's the first thing that we notice oftentimes. It's our exterior. And race plays a very significant role in this country, of course, as it does in many parts of the world, but definitely the history of this country plays even a more significant role when it comes to race. And so I wanted to have that conversation with every new employee that comes through our door that starts working there, because they're going to be working with people that are different than they are. They're going to be working with a variety of folks, a diverse group of people. And I wanted them to feel that they're working with other human beings with same interests as they have, as opposed to this is a Black person or this is a white person. I already have my idea of what this person is and all about. And therefore, it's going to take a lot of time for you guys to build any kind of a bond to be able to move together, for shared goals. So what I do is at the beginning of every group, every cohort of hires, I have an orientation with them. And I do it personally as a CEO and founder of the company. I have a conversation that deals with race. And it is not about what uniform to wear or how to serve coffee. It's really about race. And I am always surprised at how rare that conversation is, because everyone that I've talked to tells me that they've never had this experience in any kind of business that they've ever worked in. They've never, first of all, very rarely do they meet the CEO or the founder of the company. That's rare, and I understand that. That's not always possible. But not only that, but it's extremely rare or unheard of to have a conversation around race. And I think for a lot of people, they think, well, you're bringing something up that doesn't need to be brought up, that you're making an issue out of something that may be of the past. I'm older, and therefore I may have a different experience. These young people have already moved on. They have friends who are Black, they have friends who are white, they have friends who are Latino, Asian, whatever. And so they've kind of moved on. And that couldn't be further from the truth. The fact is, when we have these conversations, these young people are so excited about having the conversation. They're so in awe that there's a platform or possibility to have this conversation. And the conversation takes all kinds of shapes. And just by having the narratives, just by having people tell their race story, because everybody in America has one, changes everybody in the room. Your experience becomes part of somebody else's experience. And suddenly you have this incredible transformation that takes place in a fairly short time, where you start having a different understanding of the person sitting across the table from you. Suddenly that person is not just a Black person with tattoos, but someone that you know, that may walks in the wood and may play the guitar on the weekends and listens to country music. So it's all of this stuff really comes through, and suddenly all these stereotypes that you've embedded in your head through the ether that we constantly have to, breathe in this country, are shed, and suddenly you have a very different relationship with the folks that you work with, and a very different relationship to the people that you serve. And we always talk about the idea that a lot of people, I think, especially white people, tend to feel like they want to be race blind, that is the way forward, is to ignore race and not make a big deal out of it, because if you do, you're just making an issue out of something that you shouldn't be noticing. But we all notice race, so we can't just say, pretend like it's not there, and hope that it's gonna just be better or go away. So when somebody says, I am race blind, or I don't see race, or everybody's the same to me, we give them some scenarios of what that looks like. So an example would be, you have a host that's working the front door, let's say, and you have a Black couple walk in through the door, and the place is completely empty. And you're just starting, let's say it's early morning, they're coming for breakfast, and you take them and you seat them way in the back in the corner because that happens to be the nicest table. Well, that Black couple may not really feel good about the idea of you seating them in the corner, due to the racial history of this country, of putting people in the back, putting people of color in the back. And therefore, by being race blind and saying, well, this is the first customer, I see them in the first table and that happens to be in the back, you're really causing problems. And the kind of domino effect that takes is really quite enormous. And the people may not feel good about being there. They may get pissed off. The waiter comes to them and tries to take their order. They're not unhappy. The waiter doesn't understand why they're unhappy, because he's just a waiter. He's trying to help them. And why are they being so mean to me? And why are they running me around back and forth? And why they tip me so bad? And suddenly you start getting this sort of, oh, it must be because they're Black. It must be because they're women. It must be because of whatever. But if you really understand the idea right from the get-go, that when somebody walks to the door, you make an assessment of who that person is and put them in a context of where we are today in America, then you're able to move forward in a much more holistic way and give them really the value of their humanity in a much better way. And that's, I think, that's just a very simple, tiny example. These examples are, they're micro examples that continue to wear us out as a society, and unless we are willing to face them, these death by 1,000 cuts is just as deadly. So I just wanted, that's part of the way that we do things.
Thank you so very much, Andy. It's just such a beautiful example of sort of going deep into thinking about how to really take this idea of race and inclusion and bringing it in such a human and heart-centered way. And I know you tell your own story of race as you do that journey. And I think that that's really impressive, and leading with story and relationship, and then making it that connection for people about what that looks like in their day-to-day job is just such an example. So thank you so much.
I think HR departments are great, and I love our HR department, but they do not come in at the same level as if the CEO of the company is the one that's actually making the call and and bringing up the conversation. And that could be done now with Zoom. I mean, that's the beauty of all this, right? You don't have to show up at every place. So there's really no real excuse for it.
Thank you so much, Andy. You're getting like a ton of love in the chat as I'm seeing it, and it's really a pleasure and a privilege.
Thank you.
So it's time to shift, and this next part is all about, so if you remember the CEO blueprint, some of it is how do you create that culture of racial justice and inclusion within your walls, and then how do you do that within the community? And to help us with that, we have Fred Brown from the Forbes Funds join us. Olivia, and as well as Olivia Benson. Olivia, is Fred with us yet?
I don't think he's here yet, so it may be me doing the presentation, but that should be fine.
Wonderful. Olivia, it is such a privilege to have you. I would love to have you. Actually, I'd love to hear your story about how the Forbes Funds does its work to advance the well-being of communities and what it means for a major funder to create the kind of culture within businesses in a place like Pittsburgh, with that place-based orientation to really think about doing that. Can you share your story about ARC?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a couple of slides too, and kind of walking you through the Forbes Funds and how we got there. So if we could pull those up, I will get started. Thank you. Yeah, thank you again for having me. I apologize that Fred can't be here right now. He was jumping between a couple of meetings, so I do hope that he will be able to join us. My name is Olivia Benson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the COO of the organization, and I've worked closely with Fred and our team to really advance this work, specifically around racial justice and racial equity and philanthropy. And it really positions ourselves to show why the Forbes Funds is uniquely suited to do that work. Full transparency, I do just want to place that. I am working from home. Our offices are still closed. I have a 1-year-old. He may run behind me. He's fine. He just wants my attention and probably a snack. I have backup Wi-Fi systems, so we should be good. With that, I want to tell you a little bit about the Forbes Funds and why we're here and why this topic is so important for us. The Forbes Funds has been around for about 39 years. We're an intermediary foundation with a mission to build the management capacity of strengthen the impact of community-based nonprofits, both individually and collectively. Our work supports capacity building initiatives for human services and community development agencies by facilitating innovative partnerships, implementing learning cohorts, connecting local talent and initiatives to global frameworks like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the social determinants of health, and building coalitions through the Greater Pittsburgh Nonprofit Partnership. As I mentioned earlier, at the heart of our work is a racial equity lens that informs all of our programming today and in the future, and is really guided us in co-designing solutions. Through that racial equity lens, we've seen our grant making actually increase over 400%, and we've partnered with more than 1,500 organizations across the region. We make a business case oftentimes and say that for every $1 invested in the Forbes Funds, the result is more than $7 reinvested in the communities, or about $28 million worth of capacity building services invested in the 10-county southwestern PA region. Next slide, please. So I think that's pretty cool. And I have a picture of Fred Brown up there. He's the president and CEO of the Forbes Funds, and he's actually the first Black leader of the organization in its 40-year history. Unfortunately, Pittsburgh today is still one of the most segregated cities in the US. Between the pay gap, life expectancy among African Americans and white Americans, the gap continues to expand. But we have a number of multinational companies, tech, meds, eds, that have made Pittsburgh actually one of the hottest cities in the world. A couple years ago, it was named most livable city, to which prompted the response from many of my peers and Black leaders across the region to say, for who? While one has unlimited growth, at the same time, we see that Pittsburgh, with all the environmental challenges, air quality, maternal mortality rates, comorbidities, et cetera, there is a line in a report that said a Black person's life could instantly be extended and improved if they just left Pittsburgh. So where does that leave us and why are we here? Fred tells a story about how catalytic the tragic death of George Floyd was. People of color can replay that day over and over and in and out with visceral reactions. And then we all remember as Black squares would pop up to show solidarity and support of Black Lives Matter. But where did that really go? Fred noted that this was kind of the point in his life after burying more than 50 kids to gang violence, working in philanthropy, sharing over and over and pounding against doors to get support and reinvestment in local communities. He wrote an article that detailed his experience of that lived history, his daily experience of being followed when he's in communities that folks don't think that he should be in and being harassed. And from that article, I got an overwhelming response, but it wasn't the way that you would think. Peers and colleagues said, and I quote, like, is it really that bad? I had no idea, to which Fred responded, how? Next slide, please. So in 2020, and with our board of director support, we adopted a racial justice framework to be incorporated into our daily operations. At the Forbes Funds, we speak about 30-year inflection points, 29-year inflection points at this point, one of which is climate change, There's another 2040 minority majority population shift, and 2050 population shifting to the urban corridor. This has led to us really thinking about how we at the Forbes Funds really ingrain racial equity into our work. For anyone that's a football fan, we've adopted a Rooney Rule in hiring. We've increased our grant making, as I noted earlier, by 400% to resilient communities. We've adopted global frameworks. We've connected networks to communities outside of the city centers and in rural areas. We've increased partnerships, and we've launched virtual platforms to make our work more accessible, including the Commons, which is a digital place where community gathers and ideas are exchanged. We're also working across the state to address COVID and the glaring inequities that exist in our communities of color. Next slide, please. I put up this slide, and Fred talks about the slide because all of this is for a team comprised mostly of millennials and some of us grand millennials and Gen Z, managing over 200 plus projects. I show this slide because it's important to see who's doing this work and know that these positions and this press and this lean into racial equity is multi-generational and really driven by the folks on our team who we work with and our role as a convener, coordinator, and capacity building to co-create solutions. Next slide, please. So all of this has led to the development of what we call ARC. It's the International Anti-Racism Institutional Wireframe Cohort. We launched this in collaboration with one of our largest funders, the Heinz Endowments, the University of Pittsburgh, and our global partner, the Department of the Future in Sousse, Tunisia. This premier place-based approach to racial equity, DEI training, racial equity, excuse me, was really something that was really important to us because we realized that we can continue having long-term conversations about the challenges that are facing nonprofits and communities in our region. But if it's not a cross-sectoral partnership with businesses leading the way and nonprofits co-creating solutions, we would get stuck. We know that DEI training costs companies around $1,300 per employee, but we wanted to go deeper than DEI and really start at the top with organizations and their CEOs to drive culture change. We know that training can only do so much if the culture is bad and unwelcoming. It's simple. Who would want to work at a place that is on the surface doing the right things, but deep ingrained systemic challenges still remain? We kicked off this cohort in January, then again in February due to overwhelming support. And the official start date will be March 11th. When we begin these sessions, we say that, this is a tough conversation. These are sacred spaces, but we do start with music, knowing that music is a common thing among us that can oftentimes bring us together in ways that we couldn't imagine. Next slide, please. And yeah, so through this ARC, it's driven by 10 months of public-private cohorts that are designed to do a couple of things. It's a multi-sensory cohort experience to shift organizational talent, culture, optimize talent, reimagine institutional mechanics and relationships that make our companies look like our cities. It's one thing, as we say, to have statements, but it's another thing to demand culture change. And what does conscious capitalism look like? One that puts people, planet, place, and profit together. When we were thinking about how we wanted to do this, obviously there's still a pandemic, but we are using Zoom, we're using art, we're using music, we're using shared lived experiences, and we're also asking folks to be intentional with how they show up. So as CEOs and decision makers are in the room, we want those folks to actually commit to moving from systems change to ecosystems co-creation. And finally, leaning into that framework that I mentioned earlier, the Commons, which is really about this community consensus and achieving equitable distribution of shared resources. Next slide, please. So that's essentially what we do, thinking through a racial equity lens and really using human-centered design as a framework, co-creating cohorts, and really designing from the perspective of participants, what do they want to see and what challenges are they facing, integrating anti-racism work into everything that we do, and then finally co-creating local to global institutional equity lens audit frameworks. And what we've asked everyone to do is show us what your organization looks like. It's one thing, again, to say that you're committed to this work, but are you actually living those values by making your company a place that people of color want to be, not a place where every 18 months there's a new initiative that's announced, but folks aren't actually changing and wanting to stay in the company, and they're leaving and you have to start back over. Next slide, please. This again is just how we're doing this work. This is what we call our whole person human-centered design framework. We really are leaning into that co-created model and the social determinants of health as a framework, as well as those multi-sensory experiences using art, having those tough conversations specifically with HR and asking how is the existing DE&I work really contributing to any sort of culture change, and if it's not, what does it look like to restart that and have a courageous conversation about what's next. Next slide. And yeah, this is just an overview of the program as well. And then I think I have 3 more slides and I'm almost done. Yeah, so just a couple of quick points. We know employee engagement is sometimes at an all-time low. We face a number of challenges, and finally, companies can really play a critical role in accelerating the positive change through disruptive innovation. And I think the last couple of slides are just some of our partners who have joined us in this work. I did just want to say thank you to those folks. We really appreciate them taking a leap and a jump with us of faith, because we know this is difficult work, but there's joy in it if we can work together and drive solutions that benefit us all. And next slide. Yep, and one more. Yeah, and we ask folks that are joining us to commit to building locally through cross-sectoral partnerships, internally invest in culture change, and then mobilize your influencers and those partners that you have that also can join you on this work. And that's it. Thank you, and I appreciate you letting me fill in for Fred Brown today.
Olivia, Fred might be out of a presentation job. You can tell him though.
Is this recorded? Awesome. I will share it.
It was such a pleasure to have you. You were awesome. I'd love for people to keep putting in the chat an aspect of how Forbes Funds is approaching this that pushes the envelope, that challenges you, that inspires you, and or is something that you could take back to your organization. And of course, feel free to keep the love coming to Olivia. So as we do that, as we transition, I want to remind you that this is all about improving the well-being of, like, within your organization. This is what the CEO Blueprint outlines strategies around, within the community, and then the structures and policies and systems. You guys have heard 2 inspiring examples, one from Andy Shalal and one from Olivia Benson at Forbes Funds, and you've heard about that framework. Now it's time for you guys to roll up your sleeves and dig in, because beyond those top line things that Shavia and Catalina presented from PolicyLink for the CEO Blueprint, that blueprint is chock full of practical, specific ideas of things that you could do. So whether you're inspired by Andy or Olivia, or you're looking at the blueprint, let's dig in and see what this could look like for each and every one of you. Jennifer, would you be able to put the link in for the CEO Blueprint one more time? Then we're going to take you into breakouts for 15 minutes to have a conversation with one another. And looking at the blueprint. That was the fastest breakout ever. Did you all solve things? Because I still am just teasing. Keelan is an amazing mistress of breakouts, and she's going to help us get back in there. Thank you, Keelan. Shout out to you. Thank you for all the support you were giving us. If everybody could show Keelan some love, we would appreciate it, because we wouldn't have this session if it weren't for her.
Nice.
Thank you all. I really appreciate that. So I'm getting ready to open up the breakouts. You'll be put into a vortex and be in your breakout. So just join that room and you'll be all set.
The CEO blueprint is linked in the chat.
Awesome.
Amanda, did you want to be put in a breakout?
I was in one, but I was the only one in there.
Okay, let me get,
Sorry about that.
no problem at all. Okay, so you and Shoma were both in the same room, but now you guys are out here. So I will put you into other people's breakouts.
Thank you. That's really awesome. Appreciate it.
I'm room hopping, Keelan.
Okay, I'll let you do your thing.
Thank you. Have all of you back here in the conversation. I'd love to invite you to join us for a brief poll, and then also put in the chat what just a key insight you took away from the conversation you heard, whether it was from listening to Catalina and Shaibia, whether it was listening to Andy Shalal or Olivia Benson, and whether it was from your conversation in the breakout. And we invite you to join us in reflecting on that in using our Padlet device. So first we'll do a poll really quick. How valuable was the session to you? And then join us for our community reflection after you're done with the poll on the Padlet, so that everyone can hear and take away the key insights that you got. So that will be on Padlet in just a moment.
Thank you everyone for participating in our poll. And here is the Padlet link. It's in the chat and I will share it again.
And as you go into that, I just want to appreciate our presenters today. You guys were fabulous, but I also want to appreciate each and every one of you, because the chat was on fire during the entire session with your reflections night, and just every part of the breakouts I attended just taught me something. So thank you all. Thank you for being part of this community. Our next session is on March 26th from 12 to 1:30. Please join us. We're going to continue the conversation to think about the role of business in addressing COVID inequities. With that, we'll see you all then. And please take the last 2 minutes to reflect in the Padlet.
Thanks everyone for putting this together. Olivia did great.
Olivia, you were awesome.
Olivia,
Like
you're
I
the real.
said, Fred is going to have a run for his money now.
Thank you, Olivia. That was wonderful.
My pleasure. Thank you all. I'm going to go